Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. You all know who I am, but for the future people who watch this, I'm Shane Prada and I direct the BJC. I'm just going to give a quick intro to Ian and then turn it over to him. Ian is a furniture and object designer, and he's also a third generation woodworker. His grandfather was an Irish American immigrant and carpenter, and his father was also a carpenter. For undergrad, he departed from his lineage and acquired a BFA in abstract painting at MICA. As he pursued painting, though, he began incorporating woodwork and sculpture into his paintings, spending more and more time in the wood shop. Upon graduation, Ian started a small wood shop with some friends, doing custom fabrication and eventually starting an electric guitar company. He invested himself into any resources and jobs he could find and learned hard lessons that have shaped his perspective and skills to this day. He then went on to work at a local furniture manufacturer, building custom furniture and gaining a solid foundation in furniture design, joinery, and production. This is where Ian's love of furniture design blossomed, sending him on a lifelong exploration of craft. As a fabrication lead, Ian worked long hours and felt the pressure of fast manufacturing, which led him to feeling alienated from his craft and from the materials he was using. He stepped away from that world and set out to delve into a more thoughtful and intimate approach to understanding and honoring wood. He also began taking jewelry and small metals courses at the BJC and incorporating his metal creations into his woodwork. Together with his partner Stevie, Ian runs Realm Objects, a design studio and workshop with a taste for aberrant and eclectic design. Experimental in its approach, Realm offers unique and bespoke objects and furniture handcrafted in Baltimore. It's been special to have Ian with us over the past few months as a resident after having gotten to know him as a student. Without further ado, go for it.
Well, um, thank you, Shane. I guess I don't have to say anything because that's everything I was gonna say. Um, so let me just go nonverbal for a minute. Um, so I guess I don't need any introduction, but I'm gonna start in undergrad, where I started making abstract paintings, maybe my sophomore year, coming from kind of a more figurative background. Once I started investigating abstraction, I was really taken by the kind of building of these pictorial spaces, kind of thinking, the painting is a physical object, but also a portal. And I was thinking about how, the relationships of shapes and objects, and so I started making shaped paintings. Um, and inevitably I started incorporating more and more woodwork into my paintings, giving myself a little bit of an issue there. I was like, am I gonna start doing woodwork again? And eventually, I found myself in the sculpture studios more than the painting studios. And what I enjoyed was that it really brought that constructive mindset of the abstractions to a physical space and a utilitarian space. Um, a lot of my work at the time was kind of like these like tongue-in-cheek, kind of nihilistic, optimistic works. And upon graduating, I didn't really have a facility to continue making shaped work. So I spent time making these little drawings. They're like 5 by 7. And I started like really just letting these kind of more fantasy and portally warped shapes kind of come through, um, which was interesting for me because I very much considered myself a serious painter. And once I started making this work, I felt like there's this like burgeoning fantasy element in my work that I really wanted to explore. Once I got a facility that I could work out of, I started reinvestigating the shape paintings, but kind of through the same lens of this like ritual, listic, like fantastical realm of design. And these paintings kind of really started to make things click for me as an artist and designer. They're utilizing mixed media like plexiglass and velvet and, inlays, um, and like an honesty of, fabrication technique. Um, so then after doing that for a while, I didn't really know where to go. I'm like, 21 and I'm trying to figure things out. And a friend of mine, seeing the shape paintings, approached me and was like, we should make these into guitars. Um, we quickly just dove right in. I fell in love with the medium. Um, I hand painted the guitars. We were, quickly, we went from buying parts on eBay to like trying to figure out like, okay, how can we make these parts? And how can we make these instruments feel unlike anything else you could buy? And I started like really exploring these nuanced finishes and stains and dyes and high gloss lacquers and fabricating little parts like this truss rod cover. Um, and as we, got further into it, the exploration of these ideas kind of came to fruition. And I would always joke to my business partner at the time that like my favorite part was the fretwork. And I would always say it's like jewelry for the guitar. Like I'm making like 21 of these like little bracelets for the guitar neck. Um, and then, it's nickel silver, it's a jewelry material. And, I'm obsessively like leveling and polishing and rounding over the edges, which is not something most people do. Most guitars are just, leveled by a CNC machine. The edges are sharp and they just call it a day. Um, from there, I kind of, I enjoyed making the guitars, but the industry wasn't really for me. Um, I felt like the eccentric motifs that I wanted to explore were lost on the market of guitar builders. So then from 25 and on, I kind of entered this phase of just uncertainty in my life. I started trying to make paintings again. And at this time, I had started working full time at the furniture production shop. And I enjoyed that and I learned a lot of skills, but the alienation of labor that I eventually felt, making the same chair at this point probably 500 to 1,000 times, just like really made me lose taste in woodwork, I guess. So I started making these paintings. They're like multimedia collage kind of, I'm using glitter, graphite, sand, and paint. Um, and it was fun, but I still felt, I'm just decorating paper to hang on the wall. It didn't make sense. So I started designing my own furniture. And I made this piece kind of with this concept of medieval modern, both kind of like tongue in cheek, but also like serious. I wanted to kind of dig back further in the archives of design and modernize things that I was interested in. So I came up with this design, eventually kind of polished it up, and made it into, a production friendly piece. And it started to kind of feel like my old job again. I didn't want everything I was doing to feel that way. So I was like, let me push the sculpture, and here I'm doing a clawfoot for the first time and I'm doing all this carving and suddenly the forms, they're not quite medieval anymore. They're not, there's Gothic elements, but the shape, it's kind of pop, it's kind of cartoony in a way. And I was like trying to navigate that, as well as I'm incorporating, more metal work and mixed media. So this is a patented copper inlay. Um, and I started teaching myself how to raise copper vessels. This is a copper ashtray. Um, and at this time, I'm still trying to navigate like what is the work that I make? What am I trying to do? Um, Unbeknownst to me, there's a facility down the street from my house that specializes in jewelry work. I didn't really realize that that was adjacent as well to all of metalsmithing and fine metal work. Prior, I was forming everything on a truck hitch that I had polished, and I really had no idea what I was doing. Um, and stubbornly, Stevie had been trying to get me to take classes at the BJC where I could learn that. And eventually, there was a class on chasing and repoussé, which really clicked for me because I was like, okay, that's a really ancient technique. And I really wanted to modernize that and incorporate that into my work. I didn't really have the skill set to do that. At this point, I'm just sinking little dishes, little catch-alls. Um, and so I took the class with Adam Atkinson here at the BJC, and I ended up making these two clown belt buckles that are on lemons. There's a story for that I'm not going to talk about right now. Um, but that really clicked for me, and it really set me on a path for understanding how I can incorporate metal smithing and jewelry work into a furniture design practice. Then we get to Realm, where through kind of mutual interests, me and Stevie decided to collaborate and form this idea called Realm. We look at it as like more of an art collective, a collaboration between us, instead of a furniture brand, but at the end of the day, it's a furniture brand. Um, and so we started to kind of investigate, like, okay, we have these medieval motifs, and we don't want to get pigeonholed as like the reproduction studio or anything. So we thought about like, well, what is at the core of why do I want to investigate Gothic and medieval forms? And for me, it's always been fantasy. Fantasy was always an escape for me as a child, whether it's like through, playing Zelda games and just being like sucked into and immersed in that world and its lore. And I started to think about fantasy as something that's, speaks to alienation. It speaks to like escapism, like wanting to enter another realm. It felt very current, with AI and VR and all of that. And I was like, okay, there's something conceptually interesting here. So kind of drawing from these Baroque motifs and everything, I designed this chair. It's called a witch's chair, and it incorporates copper working. It's a hand forged copper backsplat with lab grown emeralds set into it, and a wet molded leather seat. And to me, like the concept of a witch, it can be a lot of things. Obviously, there's the witch hunts. There's, it's linking to McCarthyism and the Red Scare. But there's also this idea that witches were demonized when they used to be part of society, like witch doctors or the Strega or anything that were these people that were connected to the ancient tradition. I started to think about, like ancient medicine and all, spells and homeopathic remedies as like the old world. And we're so surrounded by technology and science and medications that frankly don't work that I really thought like, did we leave humanity behind? Where are we now? Are we in this like transhumanist state? And that kind of made me think about like mutation, perfect forms, um, and just like, we got CRISPR, we got gene splicing, we have all these things going on. So, second witch's chair we made called Quilog's chair. And it's got rabbit fur and iguana hide seat with brass hearts connecting the seat. I later set garnets in, but I didn't have time to photograph that. Um, and this is Quelaag, the Chaos Witch. She guards the bell tower in Dark Souls 1. And I was really interested in the lore of this game. It's so dense and there's so many secrets and there's so many things that unveil themselves to you as you work at it. And I felt that kind of made a lot of sense to me. And again, like the mutation, like she's a witch that through blasphemous practices distorted into this monstrosity. This is So at that point, I started taking wax class at the BJC with Jay Diamond, and that's when things really started to heat up for me. Because I'm like, okay, I can take the lost wax process, an ancient process, and utilize that to make hardware. Like, that's not a new concept, but for me, it was huge. Foundries are closing all over the US. So it's like to have access to this is a really gratifying experience. And so kind of building off like the fantasy, I made this like pendant, this goblin battle mage, kind of like a wrapper pendant. It's huge and heavy. Um, so from there, I was like, okay, I'm really gonna go into it. I designed this cabinet called the Star Platinum cabinet. It's actually based off of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And the hardware I had actually 3D printed and had cast. Um, and to me, that just added another layer to the work. Like, I felt like I was engaging in black magic, like rendering things in Rhino on my computer using these commands like Boolean unions and lofts and all of that just felt like I was just using spells to create this like object in a digital ether that I would then extrude out of a sludge of like gross resin to then incinerate and replace with metal. It felt very alchemical and also black magical because the geometry is precise. It's perfect in these programs. And there's something, when I go to like the Walters or the Met and I look at the ancient art, how amazing and perfect their geometry was. And they were just doing it by hand, but like for the purpose of achieving a divinity through their skill. And I felt like that romance was really interesting to me, but I didn't have the skills to do that. So I had to sell my soul and buy a license to Rhino. Um, so then I was like, okay, like, I'm really enjoying the metal work. Um, this is a bronze mirror with a heat patina. But the finish is the same finish I was using on the electric guitars. It's like a Paul Reed Smith type finish where you do a two-tone dye with a high gloss lacquer. Um, and I love it because the appearance becomes almost stone-like, but in a type of stone we don't really know because it's just wood. So I started trying to incorporate that more into the work. And this was one of the first pieces that is a truly collaborative piece between me and Stevie. Stevie had just finished learning wrought iron at Penland, so we're bringing the wrought iron aesthetic in here, the Gothic motifs, but also there's like biomorphic feet, and then a powder coated copper bowl with enameled trefoils in it to create this like this object that feels ritualistic. Its purpose might not be defined, um, but I really enjoyed that. This was also part of a show for Blue Dot in New York Design Week last year, in homage of their strut table. So the prompt was to create something strut-like, hence the tripod form. From there, I started kind of personally investigating this idea of like this divinity concept in the work, and thinking about the forms and as like a seraphim, so this is called the obsidian seraphim table, and kind of thinking of the biblical like descriptions in Revelations and Book of Ezekiel about the seraphim as these like seven winged like five-footed creatures. And we all know like the multiple eyed like angel wheel alien thing. And so I was like thinking about that and making this, um, thinking about like these angels that we thought were divine might actually be monsters, or aliens or whatever. And so kind of building off of that, I started to think about like utility once again as I kind of work on these like more artful pieces. So this was another collaboration with me and Stevie that I did during my residency here for New York Jewelry Week in November, yeah, of last fall. And this piece, it's called Sanguine Stars of Abaddon. It's an abyssal weapon. It's a legendary weapon. It's essentially a mace, and there's the three spike balls on it, with draconic claws holding them. Um, and it's, the idea, it's like a legendary weapon. You had to grind in the dungeon, you had to beat the boss to get this. But like, and that's kind of what guides me more process wise. But like ultimately, the work is designed to kind of invite ritual to the space, to invite this moment of noticing an object that's noticing you. This like gestalt of like, what the fuck is that, and why is it so weird or interesting or cool, and like, what is it made out of? I just felt so bored by modern object design that for me this was a logical step. These orbs were two hemispheres that I had formed and soldered together. All the heart spikes are silver, that were like rivet set through. And it was just a lot of bench techniques that I had never really done, and I had a lot of support at the Jewelry Center in figuring these out. Is really ambitious from the copper dishes, which I guess I don't have a detail of here, but so I'm bringing the copper forming back and bringing all of the ideas to fruition in this piece, and I was very happy with it. Um, from there, it was just like, let's just go for more ritual objects. We were asked to do a piece for Supper Club for New York Jewelry Week as well. So we made this cheese grater based on Etruscan soldiers were apparently buried with bronze graters. What they were used for, we're not entirely sure. Like, it could have been for mulling spices or cheese. Um, but it was interesting that these nameless soldiers were like buried with these like effigies of just like, you're gonna need a cheese grater in the afterlife, bro. Like, so we've started to think about that, and it's like, well, what's like a ritualistic cheese grater gonna look like? So we named this tomb grater, obvious pun, but kind of again homage to those soldiers that were buried with cheese graters. And this was also a really interesting project to work on. We had to die form the grater, and sharpen it. Everything's handmade entirely from sheet metal, so that was like a really interesting piece to work on. Um, this was the last piece we made. It's currently on view at Dud House in Philadelphia. It's an incense table, and I feel like it really is like the penultimate like ritual offering table that we make. And it has this copper nickel plated incense bowl, um, that was honestly, I had no idea I could even make this, from the fold forming of the scalloped rib to all of the cutouts, the rivets, the turn knob. Um, was really a challenge. And I think it came out really successfully, and I'm really happy for how much my time at the Jewelry Center has really allowed me to make work that I never in 100 years would think I would be making at this point. Bye. Thanks. It's an Irish goodbye.
Okay, we're gonna get off that.
All right. Hey, tell us what you made.
Yeah, so central to the residency for me was to really gain like fluency in the lost wax process. And I really wanted to investigate 3D printing from CAD model to print to casting. It was a lot more challenging than I had anticipated. The nuances and variables at every step are kind of difficult to keep track of and understand why certain things went wrong. So I have some examples of where things went wrong. Sometimes the resin expands too much and explodes your flask and you get a ton of flashing. Other times it leaves a bunch of ash and almost looks like a sand casting. I feel like by the end of the residency, I really was starting to understand like what works and what doesn't. And I want to say I figured things out, but I might be just as confused now as I started.
Not how it goes though.
But
Learn more.
other than that, it is a jewelry center. I did want to make some jewelry. I have some rings that I had made here. Some things I had made are at the gallery in Philly, unfortunately.
Fortunately,
Yeah.
you could work in two places.
So,
Yeah, everyone should go to Philly. I think it closes on the 28th. And it's in Old City. Lots of other cool things to see there. You should go.
On Third Street? Right?
Arch Street.
Arch Street.
It's literally on
here.
307 Arch Street.
You could visit the
Design
Museum for Art and Wood as well.
Experts. Yeah, and I, here I have like the original wax claw for the candelabra. And the wax injection, so really like fluent with a lot of the wax process at this point. I also wanted to incorporate some of my other techniques like chasing and repoussé. I'm really drawn to this like spike form. And so I was trying to make it in the hardware, and repoussé is such a time-consuming process that I kind of got to this point in the residency where I'm like, I think I'm going maybe too hard on the hardware. I'm like wanting them to feel like jewelry. And for personal reasons, I guess I feel like there's not like exactly a huge market for like really luxurious hardware. I'm sure there is. I'm just a negative Nancy about everything. But anyway, I was just, I was designing this, and the idea was that it was a pool, which, doesn't make a lot of sense in hindsight. And it just really wanted to be a belt buckle. It just kept telling me that. And so it did become one. It's powder coated.
I was gonna say,
in bronze.
It's so jammy.
Yeah.
It's hard to capture on the phone, but it's just got such a grape jam jelly kind of.
I have a question for you. Yeah. So I'm thinking about like your digital design and translating it to real life. I'm curious, do you have like almost like a digital repertoire of like symbols that because I see that, there's certain symbols that show up a lot in your work.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, every single time you go to sculpt a new object, are you like using symbols like from a library that you've already made, or are you making every single thing from scratch?
That's kind of interesting because I always have this thought in my head, so one of my favorite games is like the Dark Souls series, which is like famous for recycling assets. Like, and what that means is like they create a model that has like a motion to it, whether like, it's a monster, it swings its axe this way or whatever. For video games, like to keep the memory load low so that it can run, a lot of times they'll kind of just reskin that same asset or just reuse it so that it doesn't overload the system. For me, this part that I designed, which one was like really difficult to do in Rhino. It's just not as straightforward to make that kind of shape. so I love to reuse that. In fact, it's reused throughout this pool as both the thorns and the hearts that are sticking out of it. Um, and sometimes I plump it up, sometimes I squish it down. But I think that's like kind of interesting to, keep reusing those symbols. And so for me, like hearts and stars kind of have been a lot of my visual language. Symbols in general that might generally be abstract or have multiple interpretations or meanings have been really interesting to me. Also, just like it's kind of like this pop moment, It's also like the character design in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure like uses a lot of heart motifs in their like outfits and stuff, and I guess I just kind of simped out for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think it also makes me think of like sigils, like bringing it back to the magic realm. Not at all like the cyber sigilism movement that's kind of happening right now, but like your own language of sigils.
Yeah.
You want to bring a little more color to that?
I think there's like
what a sigil is for those of us who don't know.
You want into it? Well, a sigil would be like a shape that's drawn to represent something. Like Solomon's seal is a sigil. The Book of Solomon has a lot of rules for how to construct sigils. The Ring of Solomon was used, allegedly housed a demon inside of it. That's how King Solomon gained access to the Ark of the Covenant. And so a sigil, I guess, can be anything from describing the name of a demon or an angel to becoming a hex or a curse that you might use in witchcraft. Which I also didn't bring up in the talk, but my mom, when I grew up, was Wiccan, and I was kind of surrounded by a lot of occult motifs. I don't talk about it a lot because when I had stopped talking to my mom for like a really long time, for reasons, but I've been back in contact with her a couple of years ago. It's like, well, I'm trying to reinvestigate occultism in my practice, and like I was just curious if you have any references or books for Wiccan or like what you were thinking of. And the thing about my mom, she's like absolutely insane. And the book that she recommended to me was Wiccan for Dummies. Big yellow.
Feels like a way to shut down that new.
And I kind of just
reinvigorate
immediately was like, cool, so my whole life was a lie. But it like wasn't. But my mom had a lot of personality disorders, so like her running around naked wasn't necessarily because she cast a spell, but she would be hexing her friends.
I was pretty misunderstood. So Mary Rabel says the detail is amazing. Congratulations. And Jay has asked, can you talk more about how you approach the inclusion of tiny details like set stones in your furniture work? It feels reminiscent of the kind of Easter egg one might expect to find and perhaps search for in a video game. How much does that sense of rewarding investigation play into your design process? Good question.
Honestly, I just feel like a pro when it comes to shiny rocks. I do feel like there is, there's like a perceived, I guess, energy to crystals that I'm sure folds itself into the work that way. I guess as a maximalist by heart, I feel like the adornment is just something that I really welcome wholeheartedly, and it does to me continue to add ritualistic quality to the work. I don't know if I answered that question.
Are you using the Rhino and the computer stuff with your furniture making as well?
Yeah. That's like a two-way street. Sometimes I just make the things, like the witch's chairs were completely just sketched And for a lot of the more sculptural work I've been making, I actually just draw full scale by hand. And like translate that into templates, or I'll just like freehand cut it in wood. And then make a model later off of that. If I need to, or sometimes I'll just use the CAD program, kind of give me scale references and angles. But yeah, it goes both ways. I feel like sometimes it informs design process. Other times I feel it stifles me. I'm like frustrated with like trying to get a curve to connect to another curve in a compound radius. And it's just like, I could sculpt that in 10
You
minutes.
just move away from it and do
But
it.
it took me 10 hours
Yeah.
of like Googling.
What do you think is more challenging to work with, furniture making or metalwork thing stuff?
Oh, there's different flavors. Woodwork is like, depending on the scale, furniture, it can be a lot, but
Especially the
it's also-
sculptural woodwork that you're doing.
Yeah. So like, there's just a certain, I guess, amount of time that you have to spend with things, and so for woodworking, it's, to me, like, it can be a meditative process because, like, there's like lots of hours and lots of different components and parts you have to make. But ultimately, I feel like the reward of making something giant is worth it. But then I love to just kind of spend a lot of time on the small metal parts, and there's a certain instant gratification that I can get from, like, especially like these silver rings. They're pretty easy and quick to make. And so I feel like I need that in my work because, if a cabinet's going to take me a month or two to make, I kind of start to lose like my sense of self, or start to go a little crazy, and like I don't make anything anymore. And like all I do is work. So when I get these little moments of success, I'm pretty happy.
That's nice, like a balanced diet.
Yeah,
I think that's a
sounds
good idea. Yeah. Jace, I'd also love to hear how you think about tactility and practicality in your work. You just wanted a tongue twister for me, I think. There's such an obvious painstaking intentionality to your forms, finishes, and textures. And since so much of what you've been working on, like rings and pulls, interacts with the hand, I'm curious about how you think about that interaction.
Yeah, there's a certain level of like danger to a lot of the work. I suppose, like the witch hat is very sharp. I've had to like file probably a 1/4 inch off of the original because I kept stabbing myself specifically.
A bit of it is lodged in someone's
body. And like this pool has these like thorny moments, but they're almost like relieved by the stones or the other forms. And I guess I just feel like with everything in life, it's just like think before you touch it. It's like I want this pool is supposed to feel very organic and rosy and thorny. So like it's something that it's like you learn how to approach something like a rose for its beauty. To grab it a specific way, or else, and so I feel like there is something to be said in my work about that, but at the same time, I do try to make things comfortable, especially in the furniture. Like the chairs look like they might not be comfortable, but I can promise they're actually very comfortable. But I can make an uncomfortable chair.
I don't think they look uncomfortable. I think they look like I don't think they look uncomfortable. I think they look like something that I would break, but not because they're delicate, just because I break beautiful, nice things sometimes. It's more of a weird comment about me, though. Not about your work.
I have another question. I was really excited to hear about how you got into metal, and I just like to know how, like, what made you polish your tractor
Yeah.
that and start, like, what was the spark that got that going, and what did you end up making the first thing that you made,
It's a good question.
in metal?
I guess like metal's always like been in my background a little bit. At Micah, I did take like a foundry class, um, and like some welding, and I'd done a lot with it then, and it just kind of became something I had to shelve because having a wood shop in a small studio is hard enough. Like really difficult to add that like flaming hot metal element to it. And so when I was making the guitars, like there's so many things that I wanted to make, but I couldn't. Like I wanted to make the knobs. I didn't want to just use the same knobs every other guitar had. And eventually I wanted to make the bridges and like the other components. It seemed so out of play or out of touch at the time, but I'm realizing like it kind of was already there, it was ready to go. And so
Right. Like the more not whimsical, it's not the right word, but like how
Yeah.
you were being more playful with your
Yeah.
drawings and paintings. Like it just
And-
kind of emerged and then you were like, oh wait, it's
Yeah.
talking to me.
there's also like, I kind of have a really difficult internal battle about like sustainability in practice. It's like trees are one of the scarcest resources in the universe. Like, as far as we know, Earth's the only planet that can grow trees. And it's taken Earth billions of years to even go from grassy, like tree-like things to wood. And so the infinite recyclability of metal is something that I was really drawn to. It's not quite like clay, like where you can't just smash it down, put it back in the pile, but you can. Or sometimes like I've made things that have failed, I've melted them down and turned them into other things. Like the spikes on the candelabra were all a failed bowl that I had tried to make for that strut piece that was powder coated. I tried to make a silver bowl and it cracked a lot. So, if it wasn't something I could just like remelt, I don't know that I ever would have been able to make those again out of silver, given the prices and everything now. So I guess to get back to your question, I felt like the first thing I wanted to do with metal was get to lost wax. And now I by the end of the residency, especially with the chasing repoussé, and like the belt buckle, there's so much I wanted to do with fabrication that I never got around to. And that's something I look forward to investigating more in the work down the line.
I know something is coming next in May. You want to just quick shout out and things by mentioning that?
Yeah, so we're trying to like officially debut Realm in European Design Week in May. It's part of the Afternoon Light Design Fair. Hopefully we'll be debuting this pool on a cabinet as well as a floor-length mirror and a lounge chair and probably another incense table. We're very excited and terrified of the prospect. So Stevie's probably looking forward to it.
Well, what'd you say, Steve? Yeah.
Yay.
Good job. Well, the work will be up for a while. It's terrific, especially this new guy right here. He's like hot off the bench today. And just is such a lovely balance. Those little thorny spots are so nice. So come check it out and make it up to Philly if you can. The last question from Jay. Seems like the time and space this residency gave you to fully flesh out your understanding of these processes made a really big impact in your practice. How can people support residency opportunities like this for other artists? She already assigned me to do this, but here she goes. Is there a way we can help fund that kind of need? So I'm linking our link to donate. You also, it looks like, yeah, we also have a fund and aid going on right now. through our Ornamenta campaign. You can find that on our website. But yeah, this residency is something that we always need support for because we love hosting it. We typically host about 11 residents a year. I have one resident behind me and a former resident to my left and one resident to my left front. So, and another former resident in front. So yeah, it's a big part of what we do. Thanks, Ian. This is really terrific. And I'm glad you put together 50 plus slides. This is great. Okay, thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate it. Come make some stuff.